evening, Melvin. My heavenly King loves me, I know. Praises to him I sing, onward I go. One thing to him I cling, under I love my Savior too. I love my Savior. He loves me too. I think his favor in everything I do. Walking with him each day, the light does shine. Doing his will always, never repine. Kneeling to him I pray, I will not mind, for I love my Savior too. And I love my Savior, he loves me too. I see his favor in everything I do. Happy to serve my friend, lean on his arm. Rapture will never end and nothing alone. Was if completely under his arm, and I love my Savior too. I love my Savior. He loves me too. His Savior in everything I do. Amen. I want to thank Brother TJ as well as Brother Melvin for leading us in the songs for today. We'd like for you to please to turn with us on the handbill that we hand out. We're going to go on and finish this up and go to Romans chapter 10. But I thought it's necessary that we take a minute or so and look at the Pharaoh situation. So on page 2, down where it says in Exodus chapter 5. So in Exodus chapter 5, verse 1, and after Moses and Aaron came and said unto Pharaoh, Thus says Jehovah the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. Well, take a look at Pharaoh's response. And Pharaoh said, well, who is Jehovah or the Lord, that I should hearken unto his voice to let Israel go? I know not Jehovah, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. Well, the other information about Pharaoh was that he was a bad man. He had had the children of Israel in bondage for 400 years. They built the cities for Pharaoh. And remember what he did once Aaron and Moses went to him. The Egyptians supplied the straw, and the Hebrews made the bricks. But what Pharaoh said, he cut out the straw bringing and said for Israel to go and get their own straw and make bricks, and they should not diminish from what they were doing. And I thought was a good concept here, as someone else has said. The same sun that melts the wax can harden the clay. Now, what is that saying? The same sun that melts the wax can harden the clay. So the gospel sermon can soften the heart and yet hardens another heart. In other words, two persons can come and sit here in the audience, and when the gospel is preached, one rise up and obey, and the others leave hard, just completely disrespectful whatsoever. Well, what we're looking at God's wonders and his signs. God's wonders and signs soften some people's heart. But to Pharaoh, every time it hardened his heart even more. So, not only that, religiously speaking, one prayer can break a heart down, and that same prayer can harden a heart. So that's what we're looking at. Now, what we did was we looked at all of these things about the hardening of the heart. So we will not have a spiritual discussion tonight, and I would suggest that if you want one, to see me afterward. But I just want you to see that normally this thing is associated with signs and wonders. Now, page 3. 3 times God declares that he will harden Pharaoh's heart. So in Exodus 4 and verse 1, and Jehovah said to Moses, now this is future. God is saying, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And Jehovah says to Moses, when thou goest back into Egypt, see that thou do before Pharaoh all the wonders which I have put in thy hand. But I will harden his heart, and he will not let the people go. Now remember that the same sermon that hardens the heart breaks a heart and a person will obey. And we know that's to be the case. Well, many of the Egyptians, they were convinced. Now, really, he did 10 plagues, and all of these plagues were Pharaoh's God. So God had power over all of Pharaoh's God, but Pharaoh did not respond. Well, look at the next one, 2, in Exodus 7:3. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Now that's the will. That'll be the future, not the end. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. Now look how hardening is associated with multiple signs and wonders. So Pharaoh, he was a wicked man, and God knew it. God allowed him to live many years so that he could show, number one, his power, and number two, to cause his name to be published over all the land. In Exodus 14 and verse 4, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will follow after me. That is, when he went into the sea, when the children of Israel headed across the sea. And he will follow after me, and I will get me honor upon Pharaoh and upon all his hosts, and the Egyptians shall know that I am Jehovah. And they did so. So they followed the Lord. And I believe that Pharaoh plus all his men died in the Red Sea. Now we're down to 6. 6 times God actually hardened Pharaoh's heart. 6 times. So we're down a little further in out on page 3. 6 times God actually hardened Pharaoh's heart. See, we all know that God did it, but the issue is, how was it done? That's the issue. That's what we're discussing about. And some argue, well, it was done in that it took away the man's free will, and the man couldn't make a decision to obey. Some argue, no, it was the signs and the wonders that hardened his heart, like a good sermon on Sunday morning. Breaks one man's heart and hardens another man's heart. He get up and walk out of the door and never again dot between the door. He was hardened by a sermon that broke the hearts of another. So we're looking at 6 times God actually hardened Pharaoh's heart. Exodus 9, verse 11. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils. Now this is a sign and wonders. They had boils all over them that became sores. For the boils were upon the magicians and upon the Egyptians. And Jehovah hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he hearkened not to them, as Jehovah had spoken unto Moses. So Pharaoh did not respond, and yet everybody in Egypt had boils everywhere all over them. Could he have responded? Sure, he could have responded. He could have let the people go. Well, but his heart was hard. He says, now who is Jehovah? Who is he that I should obey him? And I read that again. And Pharaoh said, who is Jehovah that I should hearken unto his voice to let Israel go? I know not Jehovah, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. He made a decision. He's not going to do it. Now, God knew, y'all, that Pharaoh had a bad heart. And he chose, in fact, we read in chapter 9, what if God choose a vessel fitted for destruction and let it live a long time to use it to show, number one, his power, and to show, number two, have his name published all abroad? Who can argue with that? Nobody. It's God. He's sovereign. and he does as he will. But now, the Jewish people said, oh no, that makes you injustice. You're not a righteous man. Now, let me say this too as we're moving down, going down, that the angels, the evil angels, said that God was unrighteous. Now, the reason they said, remember, when the sons of God came together back in Job, and the Bible said, oh, Slewfoot was there. And Slewfoot, God had helped helped Job, and the devil just point out the wrongness of Job, the wrongness of Job. So the point is this: the devils thought that God was unrighteous. Now why? Because he said, the soul that sins, it shall die. Well, they interpret, you can't help man. Ain't nothing you can do for man. And they said this: you don't have righteousness. Now guess what God did? He chose Jesus. And Jesus is God's righteousness. In other words, he gave the best thing in heaven, and as was said Sunday, that God didn't reveal it to the heavenly hosts, but he kept it to himself. And he brought Jesus, and now Jesus is God's righteousness. In Romans, now we had this in God because God passed over the children of Israel. The sin in the Old Testament, the evil angels said God is not righteous. So God had to get Christ to die to be his righteousness. And then a little further down it says, to save us through faith in Christ, that Christ had to become God's righteousness. And that all of the evil angels had to sit down because God is righteous. And he showed that he was righteous through giving his only begotten son. Let's see now where I was. I went off on let me see, where was I? I think on page 3, and we were looking at, we were down to 6. We were looking at the 6 times God actually hardened man's heart. So we're down to Exodus 10, verse 1. And Jehovah said unto Moses, go into Pharaoh, and I have hardened his heart and the heart of So I've hardened his heart and the heart of his servant, that I may show these signs in the midst of them. Here again, you got the wonders and signs. These things should have been able to melt their hearts, but they were such that they would not be moved by whatever God did. Okay, look at number 3 on page 4. But Jehovah hardened Pharaoh's heart and would not let him go. Now take a look here. I wrote, this has to do with signs and wonder. For 3 days and 3 nights there was darkness over the land. There was God's signs and wonders. So Pharaoh was not convinced. His heart was not melted. But see, here's the problem. Some say his heart couldn't be melted. It couldn't be melted because God had hardened his heart. And this is the assumption that God took away his free will, that he couldn't obey. 4, Exodus 11, 9 through 10. And Jehovah said unto Moses, Pharaoh, did somebody say something? And Jehovah said unto Moses, Pharaoh will not hearken unto you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Now those wonders should have caused him to obey. Look at verse 10. And Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh. And Jehovah hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go out of the land. In fact, you got in this discussion that the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and you also got Pharaoh hardened his own heart. So you got both of the teaching. And what we're dealing with is this. Did God take away the man's free will? And he couldn't do it. Or was it the signs and the wonders that should have melted his heart? But his heart refused to be melted. So number 5, Exodus 14:8. Yes. Well, I was stating the fact that the argument is that everybody agrees that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. But now the issue is, how was it done? Did it take away his free will so he couldn't do it? Or did he, as his heart was, he had free will? Choose you this day. That's the passage. I want to look at a passage here where God said to Pharaoh, he said to Moses, when Pharaoh said, show me a sign, show me a sign. He said, well, you take this rod and throw it down, and it becomes a snake. Well, Pharaoh said, oh, and he called his magicians. And Aaron's rod ate up their rods. Well, Pharaoh's heart was hard. And he said, listen, my gods are equal to your God, Moses. So he didn't respond. So Pharaoh was one who looked for a miracle. Let me see, can I find that verse real quickly? I think it's in verse chapter 5 of the reading of the text. Let's see, can I find it? So when Pharaoh asked for a sign, throw down the rod. He doesn't give me the verse. I'm going to move on. So now there is a mania And Armenia says that man got free will. Communism says a man does not have free will. That we are born with the Adam sin, that all of us have Adam's sin. And we got them from our mother. And that is what is prevailing in society. That's all society. So denominationalism has gotten that point across, that we all are born sinners. Well, I'm back to the reading. I think I'm down to verse number 5, Exodus 8, verse 14, 8. Number 5, page 4, Exodus 14, 8. And Jehovah hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. For the children of Israel went out with a high hand. Now, we had a miracle here, dividing of the Red Sea. But Pharaoh, remember, Pharaoh got the people together. What's wrong with us? We're getting rid of the people that serve us. And then what they did was got all their men together and went after the children of Israel. Okay, I'm on page 4. And now I'm down to 7 times the hardening is expressed as a divine passive with God as the implied subject. That is, Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God. Look at Exodus 7, verse 13. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them, as Jehovah had spoken. Now this is the time, the turning of the rod to a serpent. So Pharaoh's servant, to him they did equal to what Moses and Aaron did. So we had miracles and signs. Yes. Okay, you read that for me, please. So Pharaoh was not convinced, because to Pharaoh, his men were equal to God's men. So back up a little further. That's something I back up a little further on that. Yeah. Now see, here's the point. The Pharaoh said, listen, if he's God, show me a sign. I want a sign. Now remember the Jewish people, when Christ was here, they said, show a sign. What sign do you give me? So Pharaoh was interested in the sign, but even though he got the signs, his heart was still hardened. Okay, go on. Okay, so I'm still on page 4, and we're at 7. We're doing the 7 times the hardening is expressed as a divine passage with God as the implied subject. That is, Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God. So we read that already, Exodus 7:13. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them, as Jehovah had spoken. Why? Because he turned the rod to a serpent. Okay, so Exodus 7, verse 14, really the same thing. And Jehovah God said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is stubborn, He refused to let the people go. Well, I guess Pharaoh figured that he did as much as God did. So Exodus 7:22, and the magicians of Egypt did in like manner with their enchantment. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, he hearkened not unto them as Jehovah has spoken. And that is, remember that Aaron and Moses turned the blood, the Nile to blood. Now, remember that they drowned the children of Israel in the Nile. So that was a place of worship. So, in this text we're reading, so Moses and Aaron turned all the waters in Egypt to blood. Well, Pharaoh called his people together. And I would say it was just a trick. They tricked Pharaoh. They said to Pharaoh, well, we can do the same. See here? So Pharaoh said, hey, we are not going to obey. Because his God, is equal to our God. But the thing that I'm looking at, that normally when you comes to the hardening, it has to do with the wonders and the signs. Look at 4, Exodus 8:19. Then the magician said unto Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them, as Jehovah had spoken. So the magician couldn't do this. Now this is the one where the lice. So Aaron and Moses called lice. In fact, the Bible says like all the ground just became moving with lice. And it was all over Egypt, everywhere. So Pharaoh said, listen, you haven't done anything. He called his magicians, his enchanters, and sorcerers, and wise men. And they came, and they did the same thing. Now, I don't think they did it, but they tricked Pharaoh. They would say to Pharaoh, listen, we can do the same thing. But in this case, they say, listen, we can't do this. This is the finger of God. I read that again, Exodus 8, verse 9. Then the magician said unto Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them as Jehovah had spoken, and he hearkened not unto them as Jehovah had spoken. Okay, so number 5, Exodus 9:7. And Pharaoh sent, and behold, there was not so much as one of the cattle of the Israelite dead. But the heart of Pharaoh was stubborn, and he did not let the people go. Not one of the Hebrews' cattle died with the Marian or the bubonic plague. And what happened was they brought a bubonic plague on all of the livestock. And the Lord said, listen, we're going to protect Goshen where the children of Israel is. And none of their livestock died. But in Egypt, all of their livestock died. So Pharaoh turned around and he said to his men, go over there and check at Goshen. And they went out there and found that none of the Hebrews' livestock had died. But Pharaoh still didn't believe. Yes. So now we're looking at Exodus 9:35. And we have to do with the rain down of fire and thunder and lightning all over Egypt. And surely there should have been something that would motivate a man. In verse 9:35, and the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the children of Israel go, as Jehovah had spoken by Moses. So the plague of hail was all over. So this thing is associated with God's signs and miracles, but Pharaoh was not convinced. Number 7, Exodus 14:5. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people was fled. And now, after the death of the firstborn kid, so now Pharaoh said, children, go. And see, that shows you that he had free will. He said to the children of Israel, get out of here. Leave the land. Finally, when Moses killed all the firstborn of Egypt, even Pharaoh's firstborn, Pharaoh finally decided, man, y'all get out of here. Exodus 14:5. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people were fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was changed toward the people. And they said, what is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And so what? They mounted their horses and went after Israel. But he died in the Red Sea. Okay, I think this is the last part that we look at. That is, 3 times we are told that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. So this section says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and yet it says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. Look at Exodus 8, verse 15. But when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart. So this section says Pharaoh did it to himself. And hearkened not unto them as Jehovah had spoken. The frogs, this was the time when he brought the frogs upon all of Egypt. And so Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron. He said, I'm going to do what's right. Shows you he had free will. I'm going to do what's right. But as soon as God retracted the frogs, he decided, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not doing it. And I read that again, 8:15. But when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart. That is, God had to call back the frogs. And he hearkened not unto them, as Jehovah had spoken. Well, number 2, Exodus 8:32. And Pharaoh's hardened his heart, this time also. And not God. Now remember, when you look at this, it says in some places that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And it says in other places, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. And I could say the same thing. Somebody get up and preaches a sermon. It breaks the heart of one, but it hardens the heart of the other. When he gets up angry, fussing, slamming the door. So that lesson, that same lesson that broke the heart of one man, and he said, what must I do to be saved? But it hardened the heart of another man. And he would fight it. And he will stomp against it. So I'm turning back to number 2. I like what the gentleman says. We don't know who said it. As someone else has said, the same sun that melts the wax can harden the clay. The gospel sermon can soften the heart and yet harden another's heart. Okay, so number 2. I'm back on page 6. Exodus 8:32. And Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, and he did not let the people go. Now, this was during the time of signs and miracles. The Lord brought swarms of flies all over Egypt. All over Egypt. But it said about Pharaoh that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. Exodus 9, verse 32. For the wheat and the spirit were not smitten, for they were not grown up. And so this was another sign here. And so divine, and I read this, divine hardening and self-hardening are interwoven. But God's act is primary and initiatory. The first 5 citations in Acts 4 through 7 all focus on God's action. The important point of Pharaoh's self-hardening only appears in 3 verses of Exodus 8 and verse 9. Yes. Yes, sir. Yes. That's right, Lester. Any man who became a ruler in Egypt, he was Pharaoh. So that's right, he was Pharaoh. That was I forgot the word, but in other words, that was the title of all the rulers in Egypt who rose to kingship, Pharaoh. Now, what Pharaoh it was, that's a good question. That's a good question. Okay. So, we're moving on. We're going to turn to Romans chapter 10. Romans chapter 10. Yes. King Ramses II. Okay. Okay. So King Ramses II. I didn't take time, if you go try to look at commentaries, this is just so confusing when you started looking at commentaries about this. Okay, so we're going to look at Romans chapter 10. So, brethren, now remember the whole thing is that God has accepted the Gentiles, and the Jewish people cannot see how God has made the Gentiles equal to them. How in the world could it be? And we have in this text that he lists all of the things that the Gentiles had. The Jews had. They received the law. They were of the promise. So the Jewish people, they had a problem with God accepting the Gentiles. So in verse 1, brethren, my heart's desire and my supplication to God is for them that they might be saved. So he's praying for the Jews. Supplication, that supplies. Take away all of that stuff and put a Y, you got supplies. So, brethren, my heart's desire and my supplication to God is for Israel that they may be saved. Verse 2, for I bear them record that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. So they were burning up with zeal. It was emotionalism, without knowledge. So they were very highly emotional, but it was without knowledge. And again, they looked at Christ coming to destroy the Roman government, set them in order, and they would be the number one nation of all the world. Verse 3, for being ignorant of God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit themselves to the righteousness of God. Now, what was their thought? Well, their thought was that Christ would come on a white horse and he would destroy all of the nation, and it would be only the Jewish nation in the city of Jerusalem. For being ignorant of God's righteousness, that is, of God's plan. What was God's plan? Christ was going to come and establish a church, and he would reconcile the world to him through that church. And believe it or not, that's the same thing is going on now with, the same thing now is going on with the millennium. The millennium, they take the same position that Christ came and he was going to set up a physical kingdom, but the Jews didn't obey him, and they got the Roman government, and the Roman government killed Jesus, and God said, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And God thought and set up a church as an afterthought. And one day Christ is going to come back, and he's going to rule 1,000 years in Jerusalem. That's where most of the churches are today. They're waiting for the millennium to come. That Christ is going to come. And so they take passages like Matthew 23, fall of Jerusalem, and say it has to do with Christ's second coming. And a lot of the plain passages like Philippians chapter 4, they take that to say it has to do with the millennium. Verse 4, for Christ is the end of the law unto righteousness to everyone that believes. So when you obey Christ, the law ends. Christ is the end of the law. The law, the Bible says, was on the back of Christ. When Christ died, the law died. He nailed it to the cross, took it out of the way. For Christ is the end of the law unto righteousness to everyone that believes. Yes. Yeah, millennium. Okay, thank you. Look at verse 4. For Christ is the end of the law unto righteousness to everyone that believes. Now here a lot of people are confused. They say all you got to do is believe. All you got to do is just believe. So somebody got a loved one sick in the hospital, and he lived it a bad life all his life. You go there and say, do you believe in Jesus? He says, I believe in Jesus. And they come back to the funeral. Oh, he was saved. He was saved. I know he was saved because he believed in Jesus. That's bad teaching. That's bad teaching. Faith without works is dead. What people teach it. So in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4, the devil blinds the mind of the unbelievers. They cannot turn to the gospel. Yes. Same thing today. Same thing. And the thing is that the Bible is hard to understand once we get all of this stuff in our minds. We bring it to the Bible and look for passages to justify it. And that's the problem with a lot of in the world. They add up so much and they come to the Bible looking for it to show that they are right. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse number 4. And I'm speaking to something that you said. And I'm talking also about the devil. That the devil blinds the mind of the unbeliever. Y'all hear that? 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4. In whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of the unbelieving. That the light of the gospel, now I like this about the gospel. Take a look. That the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should not dawn upon them. Now that's wonderful. That's a wonderful description of the gospel. And I'm going to do it again. That the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should dawn upon them. So the devil will blind your mind if you're unbelieving, so you can't see it. And I know you remember Luke 8:12, that those that didn't understand, the devil tipped into their hearts and took the word out, lest they believe and obey. In other words, you put that gospel in a man's heart, that gospel can affect a man. And the devil want to get it out. And that's why he wants churches not to preach. If you don't preach the gospel, the devil is all right. Because nobody can obey. You can't be taught wrong and obey right. If you're taught wrong, you're going to obey wrong. So the devil wants all he can to get this word all mixed up so people can't see it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, I'm back to our lesson. We are about done. In Romans 10, verse 5. For Moses writes, that the man that doeth righteousness which is of the law shall live thereby. Now, you have a righteousness of the law, you have a righteousness of faith. And the righteousness of the law is to obey the law of Moses. For the righteousness of faith is to obey Christ. Now you have a works of the law. In other words, the works of the law is to obey the law of Moses. Well, you have the works of faith. But what is the works of faith? Is to obey. When you come to the service, that's the work of faith. When you sing, that's a work of faith. You baptize, that's a work of faith. So there's a work of faith and there's a work of the law. But a lot of people get it confused. They don't know the difference between the work of faith from the works of the law. So verse 4, For Christ is the end of the law unto righteousness to everyone that believes. When you come to Christ, you turn against the law. Verse 5. For Moses writes that the man that doeth the righteousness which is of the law shall live thereby. If you obey the law of Moses, that's where you are. So you're not in the law of Christ. So verse 6, for the righteousness, here you go, for the righteousness which is of faith, thus say, not in your heart who shall ascend unto heaven. That is to bring Christ. I love this. This is beautiful now. So the righteousness of faith. It doesn't say who's going to heaven and bring Christ down. Verse 7. Who shall descend into the abyss? Who going down in the grave, in the Hades world, and bring Christ up from there? And this is the righteousness of faith. Verse 7. Who shall descend into the abyss? That is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what says it? What does the righteousness of faith say? That the word is nigh thee. Y'all hear me? The word is nigh thee. You don't have to go to California to get it. The word is nigh thee. In thy mouth, y'all see that? In thy heart. That is the word of faith which we preach. What is the word of faith? The gospel. That's the word of faith. You don't have to go running trying to find it. It's the story of Jesus. So we pick up there. And there's another thing we're going to get to. There are a lot of people believe all you got to do is confess. And we'll look at that if the Lord's will. And some of us say, you always talk, well, when you get in here, if people are teaching it wrong, what are you going to do? Skip over it? Or are you going to try to go through it and let's look at it? And a lot of people you go to verse 9, because, and here's this passage they use, because if thou shalt confess with thy mouth Jesus as Lord, and shall believe in thine heart that God raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. That's all I got to do is confess. All I got to do. So a lot of people are saying it. So we'll look at it next week if the Lord's will. Good to have you today. Good to have you. And I ask you to take some time and go over that, look at it, study it, and ask the Lord to help. I'm asking the Lord all the time, Lord, please help me. When I go to this book, I'll be praying all the time. I'm looking at it and trying to get it. Lord, help me, Lord. Help me, Lord, to see. Help me, Lord. Because a lot of the commentaries, those people are from another school of thinking. And they lead you all off, Okay, are there any announcements? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And the more you open that Bible and read it, the better you understand it, y'all. That's for us. The more we open it and read it, the better we can understand it. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for coming. We want to thank everybody Sunday. Oh, we had a wonderful time on Sunday. Wonderful time. And we had several people who came that were not members. And we were trying to work with them, get some classes to going. So thank you. You did a wonderful job. The cook, you just did a wonderful job. And as usual, 201 has more food than we needed. Thank the Lord. Just a wonderful time. Now, that's the first time that we have gotten back together since this COVID-19. But it was wonderful. And we had some people, like Sister Jenkins, she brought several. Sister Althea Hale brought several. So we just appreciate everybody that brought and people that came. Shall we stand, please? Yes, sir.